The conference room lights hummed softly as I stood frozen against the back wall. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Marion Hale, my director, clicked through the presentation slides with complete confidence. Those slides were mine, every single one of them. I recognized the fonts I'd chosen at 3 in the morning. I recognized the color scheme I'd argued about for 3 weeks straight. I recognized my words, my ideas, my 6 months of work flowing out of Marion's mouth like she'd invented them herself. The executives around the polished table leaned forward with genuine interest. When Marion finished, the room erupted in applause. She smiled graciously and thanked them without glancing my way once. I felt sick. This wasn't just theft. This was public humiliation disguised as a meeting. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of my blazer. No one looked at me. No one even seemed to remember I existed. The applause continued as Marion took a small bow, soaking up the recognition that belonged to me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone the truth. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching my career disappear in real time. The moment the meeting ended, Marion pulled me into the hallway. Her smile was exactly the same as it had been in the conference room, polished, perfect, fake. "Tessa, we need to talk about your role," she said, as if she was reading from a script she'd prepared. My stomach dropped before she even finished speaking. I already knew what was coming. "I've decided to restructure the team," Marion continued smoothly. "You'll be assisting Jenna from now on. Consider it a lateral move." Lateral move. That was corporate speak for demotion. I'd been the lead strategist on this project. Now I was being moved down to assist someone else. "Marion, I started, but she held up her hand. "It's already decided. HR will send you the details." She walked away before I could say another word. The hallway suddenly felt very small and very empty. I could still hear the faint sound of conversation from the conference room behind me. They were probably congratulating Marion right now. Celebrating her brilliant work. The work I'd done. My legs felt weak as I walked back to my desk. I felt the eyes of my coworkers on me as I passed their cubicles. Word traveled fast in this office. Everyone already knew what had happened. I made it home and fell apart. In my apartment, alone, I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. My hands shook as I sat on my couch. Tears came hot and fast, blurring my vision. I kept repeating the same words over and over. I did everything right. I did everything right. My phone buzzed. I almost didn't look at it. But I did. A company-wide email lit up my screen. The subject line read, "Exciting news, Marion Hale leads new strategic initiative." There it was, the official announcement. The name of my project appeared in bold letters. My project. My 6 months of work. My sleepless nights and my sacrifices. All attached to Marion's name now. I threw my phone onto the couch and covered my face with my hands. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled without care. No one out there knew what had just happened to me. No one cared that my work had been stolen. No one cared that I'd been publicly humiliated and then demoted in the same afternoon. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt before. I couldn't sleep that night, so I let my mind drift back to 6 months earlier. Marion had called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. "Tessa," she'd said, leaning back in her chair with a smile, "you're my secret weapon." I'd felt so proud. She'd explained the project, a massive brand strategy overhaul. She said she believed in me. She said I was the only person she trusted with something this important. Over the next months, Marion and I had spent late nights together, working through problems. We'd eaten takeout directly from containers while discussing strategy. We'd laughed at each other's terrible ideas. I'd thought she was mentoring me. I'd thought maybe I'd found a friend. I'd believed she had my back. Looking back now, I could see it all so clearly. Every late night had been a setup. Every laugh had been a lie. Every moment of trust had been Marion building the perfect cover story. She'd gotten close to me on purpose. She'd made me believe in her so that I'd work harder than I'd ever worked before. And then she'd taken it all. The worst part wasn't that she'd stolen my work. It was that I'd let myself believe she actually cared about me. The next morning, I returned to the office like a zombie. Everything felt different now. People who'd made eye contact with me before now looked away. My friend Marcus from accounting avoided me in the break room. When I walked past clusters of people talking, they went quiet. Nobody wanted to be associated with the person who'd been demoted. I could feel the judgment, not from Marion, but from everyone else. In one afternoon, I'd become the girl who'd failed. I didn't know yet that Marion was actively making sure nobody would support me. I found out later that she'd told people I'd been underperforming. She'd suggested I wasn't committed enough. She'd planted seeds of doubt about my abilities. She wasn't just erasing me from the project, she was erasing me from the company's memory. My inbox had filled with menial tasks. Tessa, can you reorganize the files? Tessa, can you update the spreadsheet? Nothing meaningful, nothing with my name on it. Marion walked past my desk without acknowledging me. We used to wave at each other. We used to have inside jokes. Now I was invisible to her. But I understood what she was doing. She was covering her tracks. She was making sure nobody would believe me if I complained. She was building the perfect narrative where she was the brilliant leader and I was just the struggling assistant who couldn't handle the pressure. That's when Eli found me. Eli worked in the design department and sometimes helped with our projects. He pulled me aside at lunch and spoke quietly so nobody would hear. "Everyone knows that was your work," he said simply. His words made my chest tighten. It was kind of him to say, but kindness couldn't fix anything. Kindness couldn't give me my career back. Kindness couldn't undo what had happened. "It doesn't matter," I replied, not bothering to hide the bitterness in my voice. She got the credit. She got the promotion. I got demoted. That's how it ends. But Eli shook his head. "Not necessarily," he said carefully. "You have proof of everything, right? You could go to our. You could." I cut him off. "And then what? Tell them my director stole my work. She'll just say I was assisting her the whole time. She'll say the ideas were collaborative." And honestly, I looked directly at Eli. Nobody would believe me over her. She's been here longer. She's more senior. I'd just look bitter. Eli didn't have an answer to that. We sat in silence for a moment. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight with words or complaints. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. And I was going to be ready. A few days later, I overheard Marion bragging to the VP. She was talking about her upcoming quarterly presentation. She was going on and on about how brilliant the insights were, how cutting-edge the strategy was, how proud she was of the work. The quarterly presentation, of course, that was where the project would be shown to the entire executive board. That was where Marion would stake her reputation on the work. And that was where everything would fall apart. I realized something in that moment. The project would expose itself. All Marion's lies would eventually collapse under the weight of scrutiny. If she made detailed claims about the methodology, people would start asking questions. If she tried to explain the systems, she'd stumble because she didn't actually understand them. She knew the presentation, she knew the slides, but she didn't know the work behind it. She didn't know the decisions I'd made or the problems I'd solved. And when executives asked her technical questions, she wouldn't be able to answer them. That's when it hit me. I didn't need to fight Marion. I just needed to stay calm and let her hang herself. I started documenting everything that same day. I went through my personal files and found every draft, every version, every email where I'd explained my thinking. I took screenshots of designs before Marion had presented them. I collected timestamps from every document I'd created. I gathered all the proof of my authorship and quietly forwarded it to my personal email account. Each click felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I wasn't being paranoid or petty. I was being strategic. I was collecting evidence, not to use immediately, but to have ready. I organized everything into folders. I created a document that showed the timeline of the project, every milestone, every decision, every moment I'd contributed. I saved it all to an external drive that I kept at home. Nobody at work knew what I was doing. I didn't tell Eli. I didn't tell anyone. I just worked quietly, building my case without anyone knowing I was doing it. Then I started doing something else. I kept updating the live systems for the project under my own credentials. Nobody noticed. Marion never checked the back end. She never looked at who was actually maintaining the data. She didn't care about the technical work. She only cared about the credit. So I perfected the systems. I improved the data models. I refined the projections. Everything Marion would be presenting in the quarterly review, I made better. But here's the thing, I did it in ways only I would understand. I created mathematical relationships that looked simple on the surface but were actually complex underneath. I built in cross-references that only made sense if you understood the original methodology. If someone tried to explain the work without actually knowing how it was built, they'd stumble. They'd contradict themselves. The numbers would seem to shift in ways they couldn't explain. I watched Marion rehearse for her upcoming presentation. She sat at her desk, clicking through the slides, reading the talking points I'd written. But I could see she didn't understand what she was reading. She'd pause at technical sections, frowning slightly before moving on. She'd mispronounce terms. She'd explain concepts backwards. Every mistake I witnessed felt like poetic foreshadowing. I knew what was coming. She'd walk into that quarterly review confident and prepared. And then everything would fall apart. The irony was that I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt calm. I felt like I could see the future clearly. Marion had no idea what she was walking into. One afternoon, the VP walked past Marion's desk and complimented her leadership. Marion smiled graciously and thanked him. I watched this exchange from my desk across the office. I smiled too, but for a different reason. I knew that same VP would be in the quarterly review. I knew he'd be asking questions about the methodology and the data. I knew that in a few weeks, his impression of Marion was going to change completely. I just had to wait. Eli warned me quietly one more time. Be careful, he said when we ran into each other near the bathrooms. If she finds out what you're doing, she won't, I interrupted him. I'm just doing my job. I'm just maintaining the systems like I'm supposed to. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. Just be careful, he repeated. I appreciated his concern, but he didn't understand. This wasn't anger driving me forward. This wasn't revenge. It was precision. It was the difference between acting rashly and acting strategically. Marion had made her move. Now I was making mine. Over the next few weeks, cracks began to appear in Marion's work. Reports didn't line up with each other. Numbers contradicted previous statements. She blamed her team. She blamed the data. She blamed everyone but herself. HR started asking questions about inconsistencies. Other managers noticed that her explanations didn't quite add up. And where was I during all this? Keeping my head down, collecting every single inconsistency, every mistake, every moment when Marion had contradicted herself. I was building the perfect record of her incompetence. Then Marion did something that almost made me laugh. She asked me to clean up the final quarterly deck. She said she wanted it to look perfect. She didn't realize what she was asking. She was asking me to prepare the exact evidence that would destroy her. I worked on those slides carefully. I organized everything perfectly, and then I did one small thing, I edited the metadata of the slides. It was a tiny line hidden in the document properties, created by Tessa Cole. It was invisible to anyone just looking at the slides. But if someone actually checked the source files, they'd see it immediately. The night before the quarterly review, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying everything in my mind. Not the betrayal, I'd already processed that. I kept replaying the silence. How no one had stood up for me. How people had just accepted Marion's version of events. I realized something in those dark hours. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted the truth. I wanted everyone to see what had actually happened. I wanted Marion to face the reality of her choices. And I wanted my work to be recognized for what it actually was. The day of the quarterly review arrived. Marion walked in radiant and confident. She'd taken extra care with her appearance. She'd even gotten her hair done. She was ready to shine in front of the executive board. The executives settled around the table. I sat in the back corner of the room, quiet and small. The lights dimmed. The presentation began. Her presentation. My work. On the screen in front of everyone, the slides glowed with the strategy I'd spent 6 months developing. Halfway through the presentation, the VP interrupted. These numbers don't match last quarter's system reports, he said, frowning slightly. Marion blinked. They must have changed the model, she said quickly, but her voice had changed. It wasn't confident anymore. It was defensive. The room stiffened. I could feel the energy shift. Executives exchanged glances. This was the moment. This was where everything changed. The CTO started asking technical questions about how the data was structured. Marion tried to answer, but her explanations didn't make sense. She contradicted herself twice in one paragraph. The CTO frowned and said, "Let me check the source files." He pulled up the system on his computer while everyone watched. He clicked through folders, checking origins and permissions. Then he found it. Who authored these reports? He asked, looking at his screen. The metadata flashed on the display behind Marion, created by Tessa Cole. Silence filled the room. It was the kind of silence that feels like thunder. Marion froze. I could see the color draining from her face. The executives turned in their seats. Everyone looked at Marion, then at me, then back at Marion. She started stammering, trying to explain. Tessa was assisting, But, the VP cut her off immediately. Then why does every single deliverable trace back to her credentials? The design files, the data models, the entire methodology. Marion opened her mouth and closed it. She had no answer. I stood up slowly. The room went quiet. I walked forward calmly, clearly, deliberately. All I did, I said, my voice steady and strong, was the work I was assigned. I maintained the systems. I created the methodology. I designed the strategy. That's all. My tone wasn't vengeful. It was steady. It was honest. The power shift in the room was complete. I wasn't angry. I was just stating facts. And facts are powerful. Later, in HR, Marion's situation was being officially documented. The company launched an investigation into what had happened. I was called in and asked to submit my complete contribution record. I handed over every file, every timestamp, every piece of evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. It was lined up like a perfect timeline of my work. A week later, a company-wide email went out. The subject line was simple, personnel update. The message was even simpler. We wish Marion Hale the best in her future endeavors. That was corporate speak for, she's been fired. The office buzzed with conversation. People whispered at their desks. Everyone suddenly remembered how I'd been treated and suddenly wanted to be my friend again. But I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I just breathed for the first time in months. The VP called me into his office. I walked in carefully, unsure what to expect. We'd like you to step into Marion's role, he said simply. The position is yours if you want it. I hesitated, not from fear or doubt, but from clarity. I knew what I wanted, and it wasn't this. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But I think I'm ready for something of my own. Something where I don't have to worry about someone else taking credit. I packed my desk quietly. It didn't take long. There wasn't much to pack. Eli hugged me goodbye. Other people said nice things as I left, but I didn't really hear them. As I walked toward the exit, I glanced back at the conference room where it all began. The same room where Marion had stolen my spotlight. The same room where I'd felt so small and so invisible. Now it was just an empty space. I realized something important in that moment. Some names don't need credit anymore. Some people just need peace. 6 months later, I opened my own small agency. It wasn't huge. It was just me and a small team of talented people I'd carefully chosen. But it was mine. On the wall of our office, every team member's name sat proudly beside their work. No one would ever be invisible here. No one would ever have their work stolen. No one would ever feel the way I'd felt. Marion had taught me something valuable, even if she hadn't meant to. She'd taught me that if someone steals your voice, the answer isn't to fight to get it back. The answer is to build a place where no one can silence it again. I looked around our office and smiled. This was victory. This was peace.